At CBS, we've been lucky to be able to turn to Anthony Salvanto to help us make sense of polling and the science behind those numbers. Now, Anthony's sharing his wisdom with everyone in his new book, Where Did You Get That Number? And he's going to help unveil the mysteries of polling. Anthony, thank you for taking the time. It's an interesting read, and you talk with that, you open with that pivotal moment on the night of the 2016 election when so many people started saying, whoa, the pollsters, they didn't predict this. They got it wrong. What do you think is the biggest misconception, though, about polls?
Yeah, one of them is that it's that they're predictions. They're not predictions. I don't presume to tell people what they're going to think. My job is to understand what people think now and why they think it. I think too often, whether it's in the coverage of polling or even sometimes the way we talk about it, we make it sound like we're covering a horse race and we're the scorekeepers.
We want the bottom line.
Yeah, people just ask, well, who's going to win? As though that single number, the leader in a poll, tells you the whole story. Even today, if we say, okay, the Democrats are leading in the race for the House, that doesn't mean they're going to win. It means that's where things stand now. And in a lot of ways, I think that's more powerful and a better use of polling, because when people ask how these things work, what they really want to know is, who are these people around me? Well, you saw even in the panel where people were talking to each other and say, well, I didn't know that about you, or now I understand you a little bit better. In some ways, when we see the polling and people are telling us, this is what I think and this is why they think it, those are the things that people really want to know. So our job as pollsters, you should judge us, but you should judge us not on whether we predict the world, but on whether we explain it.
And people's thinking evolves with events and over time. You put an analogy in the book of polling in your grandmother's bolognese sauce. Yeah. Explain that.
Yeah. Well, look, pollsters have always said that what we do is try to create a microcosm of the country in our polling samples. And that's how polls work. Because people ask me all the time, well, how do you talk to 1,000 or 2,000 people and know the whole country? I mean, it's counterintuitive, and that's a really good question.
And who are these people?
And who are they? And who do you talk to? And how do we find them? So the example that I use is, well, you can do this with a sample. And, my grandmother used to sit around and be there on Sundays, and she'd make this giant vat of spaghetti sauce. And if we wanted to know how it always tasted really good, by the way, everybody would get a bowl. And you didn't need to eat the entire vat of spaghetti sauce to know how it tasted. You were sampling it. Well, what's the mechanism behind that? It's that the meatball that you got tasted like the meatballs that you didn't eat from the vat, or even the grain of salt were like the other grains of salt. Well, in a polling sample, what you're doing is bringing together Republicans and Democrats and people young and old and of every different sort. So when people say, well, you didn't call me for the poll, or you didn't talk to anyone, that I know, well, we probably talked to somebody like you and somebody who could represent you. If you're a Republican, there are millions of other Republicans we could bring in.
As we're learning.
As we're learning. So, there's certain power in that we can be represented in our views by somebody else who's like us in the sample.
How honest are people? Do they lie?
No, they don't lie. And I think because, most people are decent and honest, they don't realize how much work it would take to lie. First of all, why would you spend 10 minutes on the phone?
But you do talk about a reluctance to sometimes be fully candid about who you're voting for.
Well, the reluctance in the sense of, and I think this is playing out right now, actually, in 2018 as well. When we see Republicans today telling us that they're not necessarily voting for a Republican candidate, they're telling us that they're unsure. So they're certainly not lying. They're telling us they haven't made up their mind quite yet. But the way we should read that number, even if it's just 5 or 10% of them who are saying that, is we should say, well, they're already conservative and they voted Republican in the past. So is that a group that we shouldn't be surprised if they ultimately come home and vote for Republicans? No, we shouldn't. And that's a way to look at polling as an entire dynamic, so of telling you what could happen in the world. So when people answer and say that they're unsure, we take them at their word, but we should also look at other characteristics about them and think, well, what might they do and what else are they going to decide on?
Watch them and see which way they swing. And we know you'll be doing that, Anthony, with these upcoming midterms for us. So thank you.
Thank you.